Okay, I think.
All right, so we are going to reflect on our reflections regarding our use of nonviolent communication within music therapy settings. However, first we better figure out what our settings are. So we're going to bounce through all three of us right quick and give a couple words on who our clients were. I'm Janine. I work in a lot of different settings. For this exercise, I used my teen psych patient who is outpatient. He is a senior in high school, and he is working through post-trauma and dissociative identity, largely in a musical theater context, because that's his jam. Shaylin, tell us about yours.
Yes, so my name is Shaylin. I am a graduate teaching assistant at CSU, and I used for this video a session in an elementary school special education classroom, and we generally have between 3 to 10 students per session. So, Katie?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Katie, and so I am a music therapist at an outpatient neurodevelopmental, neurodiverse clinic where I work with a bunch of different other disciplines. Particularly for this video, I chose a certain client. I only do individual sessions or co-treats, so I only see one kid at a time. And this kid, particularly what we're working on is social emotional awareness. We're working on communication skills, and because they have some communication disorders, a lot of like expression and such like that. So I'm really excited to have this conversation since we're all kind of adolescent based. So this is going to be cool because I feel a lot of our discussions and like within class and such have been a broad spectrum. So let's see what happens.
Well, and one of the things I love about teens is once you get them talking, it's a whole new world. Because they have ideas and opinions and feelings, and they are adults in almost kind of sort of once they learn how to deal with it. So yeah, I love teens once you get through the walls.
Or it's like me and Shaylin, where you have like the adolescent kids, like the 6 and under, and they are basically adults and they just have the most fantastic conversations.
Yes, and imagination.
Also
I had a 6-year-old. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go off topic just for a second. But I had a 6-year-old who her favorite thing was to pretend to be somebody on any given day. So every day she walked in the room, I would ask her, "So what's your name?" And then that would be her name for that day, which was kind of a fun way for her to demonstrate how she was feeling without even getting into identifying feelings that she had no words for. So
kept you on your toes for the hello song.
Yeah.
Oh, good gosh, yes. And sometimes she was a puppy. You never know what you're going to get.
For sure. So
that steers us clearly. Yeah, go ahead.
So we decided as a group to do the first 3 prompts. The first one is, what verbal skills did I use that were probably going to be used whether or not I took this course? For myself, I think that verbal framing I was probably going to use regardless. So greeting clients, setting the tone, giving directions, and restating clients' responses. Also, some verbal exchanges. So with my students, asking, do you need help handing things out or handing out instruments? So I would say those are probably verbal framing and verbal exchanges. Some of those I would have probably used without taking the course.
Yeah, Sheila, I'm kind of in that same boat with you, because in particular with this client that I work with and a lot of the kiddos that I see, that verbal framing is so important, because a lot of the time what I'm working on is regulation within the sensory system. And so a lot of times when my kids come in, they are not in the opportune spot within their own bodies to work on a higher order task. So sometimes having those too broad opening invitations can be very scary and can be too much for them. So creating that verbal framing ability to be like, okay, let's grab the drumsticks and play this song. Giving really concrete directions is super, super beneficial for my kiddos. So that's one that I really use a lot. Janine, I'm curious to hear what you use with your teen musical theater kid, though.
So interestingly, coming into a session with him is in many ways like starting a session with your kid. And I have permission to use his name, so I will. Connor, when he comes in, will just speak and just dump you can ask him, so how's your week? And he will tell you all the things that everything went wrong all week long. And usually there's 5 people who did stupid things, and we get into politics and everything else. So creating a framework in which he can get that off his chest so we can actually get started with the session. It takes some time. But when you were talking about needing to pull your kids into a space where they were ready to work, it's the same thing with my 18-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like for all of us that framing can really help at least get the session started, especially, and kind of set the tone for the whole session.
I feel like also maybe almost like setting expectation too, because like you're saying, Janine, I also have some other kids, not particularly the one that I chose for the video, but where they can just go and like sometimes this is their opportunity to express. I mean, we're therapists first, so being able to let all this off, but like, how do we rein the session back in, or how do we create, like, I can't think of a better word other than like boundaries, but like boundaries within the scope of our practices, which I know is another big thing within the book of like, what is within our scope to support. And that's different for every therapist.
And sometimes it depends on the kid too, because I know with Connor over the past couple years, he has become able to find out when he's starting to repeat himself. We all do it. But he'll self-identify that point, and he will see me flash a red flag, just sort of like you did on the time, and help me spin it to, and now let's sing.
Yes.
So yeah. You like that segue? Hey, Shaylin, what are we going to talk about next?
I love that. That was perfect. That was making everything very cohesive. So the next prompt that we have is, did something I learned in this course show up somehow in this session? So I kind of divided mine between clients and students. So I kind of have both. But I'm trying to, I think I noticed myself doing a lot of like reflecting or paraphrasing. So one of our clients, we were using an auto harp, and we were letting each of them strum with one of the giant picks. And one of the clients was like, yes, like it's so cool. It has, buttons. And so just validating, you're right, it has buttons and strings, and what were some of the other ones that I mentioned? Modeling the client's movement. So kind of doing that imitation also. So asking, like this, and, checking that I made sure that I was doing what they had, wanted, or what they had modeled, and making sure that I was accurately modeling that or reflecting back to them what they had chosen. So at least on the client side, those are a few of the things that popped up in this session.
Yeah, Janine, do you want to go next, or can I take a little bit? Because I'm relating to Shailene a little bit. I feel like because of just our ages with our kids, particularly with the client that I chose within this session, which was interesting in particular, they were having a harder time making choices with themselves. So like usually within the session, we start off with, we do a hello, and then the expectation is that we build a schedule so that there's expectations of what we're doing within the 45 minutes that we're together. And they were really struggling with identifying what they were looking for. So I found myself again with that verbal framing and a little bit more of that verbal praising of whatever choices they were choosing. I use a lot of visual images of what we're going to do. So I have a book of like all the instruments that I have and all of the sensory opportunities that we can create. And so starting off with the image of 4 was very overwhelming for my child. And we just got a lot of, I don't know, I'm unsure, I'm uncomfortable. And so I was giving a lot of verbal praise of saying, thank you for telling me that you were feeling that way. Let's create a more a better opportunity for you. So taking away some of those options, which was able to create a much more successful environment. Honestly, throughout a lot of my sessions, it's been so like, I felt like in an animated series, like that light bulb moment of like, oh, I'm realizing this from my nonviolent communication class. Oh, I'm realizing this. So that's been kind of exciting to see.
Yeah, so for me, with Connor, one of the things we've been working on is helping him do role playing, which is one of the only standard clinical practices for DID. And so because he's a musical theater kid, we role play in his audition material. So we were making audition recordings for college. And so he had this character, and we went through the color wheel of emotions, because if he's 18, he needs to be able to name what this emotion is. And so going through that and identifying, it sounds to me like you're feeling something in this red area. Can you narrow that down for me? So he would identify that for me. He hates the color wheel. So it's been a while since I've dug it out. But it's really a very Rosenbergian technique to put names to those emotions and to provide the opportunity to do so. And if you looked at like the first take of his audition for his contemporary tune, it was worlds different than once we finally identified, okay, who is this character? What is he doing? What is he feeling? Why is he saying this? And actually put on the character. That was really, really interesting to see, just the contrast in the videos. Also, something that I've been struggling with him, you may have noticed I have a very active face. I reflect a lot of what I hear with my face, and we meet at the hospital. I wear a mask. I can't just reflect emotionally with my face anymore, and that's been a crutch for me, because sure, we're reflecting and paraphrasing, and if I can just do that here instead of with words, it's a shortcut, and I'm less likely to screw it up. So with a mask on, I've had to be a lot more particular about what I say, and I was doing my best in this session particularly to try and reflect precisely and while giving time for response, what he was giving to me, if that makes any sense at all.
No, that makes total sense. I feel like we could all relate to that aspect. Like working with kids, like animation is such a facial expression is such a huge part of the social experience. And so I know, Janine, on a simpler level, we use something called the zones of regulation, which breaks every different emotional fields into like colors. So there are like red zone, yellow zone, green zone, blue zone, and that we always show our kids that it's like you want to be able to move through them all. It's okay to be in the red zone. It's okay to be in the blue zone. And so I use that a lot, particularly even with the kid that I've been working with, and sort of that shaping and modeling motion of modeling faces. Like I play in a face game with my kids. And so instead of using the bottom part of our faces, we've been like, how do our eyes look? How does our body react? Like this is mad. And so like, can't just use our face anymore. We have to use more full body, which is pretty, making us work harder as therapists, I feel like, and grow more.
And I relate with both of you to that, with that, especially with my students, because I'm trying to guide them on, how to lead a session. And, sometimes I want to jump in certain ways, but I can't because of the COVID, precautions, or, I want to just show an animated face to be like, hey, like, smile or whatever it is. But
Right.
I don't have that. And so I've been using these verbal skills to kind of help. So like, in this session, for example, they did not tell the clients like what the pick was or the auto harp. And so instead of like showing, like pointing or whatever, I just was like, oh, what's that black thing in your hand? And that kind of was enough prompting rather than telling them, tell everyone what's in your hand, just like framing it as a question. So what is that thing in your hand? And then they knew exactly kind of where I was leading with that question without making it more of like a demand. So making more of a conscious like request, I guess, in a sense. So
totally. That actually kind of, I think, is a good segue, because we're going to go into our final note, which was some phrasing that if we could do it over, what would we do differently? I feel like that's me constantly within my day. If I could do this over, what would I do differently? And one of the big ones that I found myself doing, we use a lot of I wonder phrasing. I do that specifically with my kids because I want to create a less, again, scary environment. So rather than, sometimes I know we've been using, even yesterday within our conversation, like tell me and such, using I wonder can create less of a scary and like too much of a response on one person, because it creates an open environment for everyone in the room. But I noticed I said a lot of, I wonder if we should put this on our schedule. And it still kind of created a dichotomizing event, because if can be like a yes or no. So if I could go back, I would definitely start using more, I wonder what we should put on our schedule. I wonder what we could be feeling about this. So even still, as I'm trying to create more of an open space, like even more so with my language, I need to work on that. And then another big one was just the type of praise that I give. Like I tend to use a lot of quick, like fabulous, 100%. That was great. And I know I've been working really hard on it and noticing it in my sessions, but even still hearing it back in a recording, I could definitely use more fuller phrases. Like one that I specifically said, where was it? You're doing a fantastic job of matching your speed with my guitar. It sounds amazing when we play together at the same time. Like just fuller, more direct praise, I think can go a long way.
So I've got an illustration. So I don't like the 100 ways to praise a child, do this specifically and all of that, just because I don't do well with scripts and human interaction. But so I'm a church pianist. This morning I had to actually listen to the sermon twice because we had 2 services. And so my pastor says, John did a good job. John did a good job. He was freaking John the Baptist. Okay. So we don't just say, did a good job. Did what? It was the most clear example I'd ever heard of why they did a good job. It means nothing. Without actual specifics and context, it means nothing. And until I heard it in that setting, I mean, they have churches named after this man. Surely he did better than a good job at something. So yeah.
Like, give me a little bit more specifics.
Right. What did he do?
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate that more than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes hearing it framed a different way can make you think of it totally differently. So that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so with my Connor, I'm hoping you guys can give me a little feedback on this, because it's something I'm struggling with in helping him. So I forced him to listen to his videos, because you have to. Before you're going to send in your audition video, you'd better look at it. And of course, the first thing he wants to say after he sees himself on video is, oh, that was awful. So I wasn't going to let him say, oh, that was awful. But I need to give him an opportunity to express his self-consciousness in watching him on video. So what would y'all say? What would you do there in order to prevent the blanket negativity and invite him to actually have his emotions in that moment?
I almost wonder if you could frame it as, I know something I do with my students is, you know, I wonder what are 3 things you did well and, you know, 1 thing that you want to work on, so that he can still express, like, you know, if he says this is, you know, I did awful. Well, you know, what is something that you want to work on? What do you want to improve on that's, you know, you don't feel is going well in this video, but then also having him name 3 things that he did well, and just kind of framing it up that way before you do it, that maybe could be helpful in like validating like the things that he wants to improve on while also recognizing the things that he did well.
I just keep hearing Dr. Knight with like, why? Why do you feel? What is the feeling like of the awful? That's just what I keep hearing. Like, well, you say this is awful. Why is it awful? What is the feeling behind that? Like, why do you feel it is awful? Even though, yeah. Totally. So like kind of almost bringing it back to him so he can dive deeper into what exactly it is. So that way that can be something more concrete to change.
Yeah.
I like that. I do.
Cognizant of that we have about 19 minutes right now.
Okie dokie. Shaylin, go.
Yes, I'll go really quickly. I was kind of similar to you, Katie. I noticed myself asking dichotomous questions, and I've been trying to get better with that. So like, instead of asking, in this session, I asked, does anyone know what instrument this is? And looking at it again, I wish I would have said, I would love to know if, you know, the students know the name of this instrument, or I would love to know if you know the name of this instrument, talking with the students. Sorry, students, my students, but yeah, so I think that's one thing I would have phrased differently, so it was not a dichotomous question. That's something I noticed as well. So,
oh, awesome! Yay! Thanks everyone for chatting.
It's been a great discussion.